Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation, a series exploring the makings of our exhibition. In this case, we're talking about Deepfakes, Art in its Double, an exhibition curated by lead curator and director, Professor Sarah Kenderdine, at EPFL Pavilions, Amplifier for Art, Science, and Society, at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, EPFL Lausanne, an exhibition which has just extended into May 1st, 2022. My name is Monica Antohi. I'm communications lead with EPFL Pavilions. And today we're welcoming Yves Sussman and Misha Libman as we take a more in-depth look at their work, 89 Seconds Atomized, part of Deepfakes Art in its Double exhibition. Yves Sussman is a Brooklyn-based artist and filmmaker. In the course of her career, her work has pushed the boundaries of cinematic experience, compelling viewers to actively participate in the invention of the story. Her algorithmically generated film, White on White, Algorithmic Noir, edits live, never repeating the same video twice. For this work, for specifically 89 Second Atomized, Yves has collaborated with Misha Libman of snark.art, a blockchain laboratory exploring creative and commercial possibilities in art, founded in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in the early 2018 by Andre Alekin and Misha Libman. Misha's background is in software development in the financial sector. So that being said, I want to welcome both of you to the conversation. Hello, Yves and Misha, and welcome to the In Conversation series.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I think the conversation is quite vital in terms of what you've actually achieved together and what you're pushing through in the art world and in the blockchain world. So we're talking specifically about your work, 89 Seconds Atomized. I would like to delve directly into it, but let's do a little bit of introduction of Yves' background. What brought you to this? What brought you to art, first of all, and how did you end up doing cinematography as a form of expression, and why this painting? We'll get to that a little bit later, but give us a little bit of bio intro into who Yves Sussman is.
I mean, what brought me to art? I think I've done some form of art all my life and been exposed to many different forms of art and art history, and lived in a lot of places as a young kid, and so I think I always had an upbringing that was quite focused on visual and aesthetic possibilities or something. And actually, my father had a big camera collection, and so I was very intrigued by cameras even as a young kid. And he had all these crazy spy cameras. He would take me into the dark room at his university when I was a kid. So I played in the dark rooms a lot when I was younger. So it was always sort of just the potential to make things was always there. And so I understood that was something you could do. I don't think I understood much about contemporary art until maybe I got to college. But I did understand that one could make things, and that was a way to live or something. And I was always very intrigued by cameras. But yeah, I wasn't really a filmmaker though in school. I did more photography, printmaking. I came to film and video a little bit later, kind of through a background in sculpture and installation. I think that's why, I don't make traditional movies in a mainstream sense. I don't make things that are mainstream narrative. I've made things that don't even use language. I made a feature film that is basically all with music and singing, but no language. So I'm really interested more in trying to turn some of the preconceptions and the cliches of narrative filmmaking on their head. And so, like you talked about in the introduction, implied narrative. How do you imply the narrative? Can you imply it with gesture? Can you imply it by messing with language, by messing with chronology, by using an algorithm to edit a movie, by basically letting the viewer come up with what's going on and invent so that the viewer is taking part in the invention of the piece. And that does, in a way, lead into both 89 Seconds Atomized and 89 Seconds at Alcazar, the original video from which we created 89 Seconds Atomized. The 89 Seconds at Alcazar was based on, obviously, Las Meninas, this famous painting by Velázquez. but we try to imply what's going on in the room. We try to imply the psychology of the room. We try to let the viewer complete the narrative just by the choreography. And so the choreography and the gesture and the sound, there was sort of 60 tracks of this very complex soundtrack designed by the composer Jonathan Bepler, and choreography by a great choreographer and dancer named Claudia de Serpa Suarez. And so it's, even in the original making of that video, there was this idea that the viewer has to bring something to it. The viewer has to bring in their own invention of what's going on in the room. And the painting does that originally from whatever 1650, what's the year of that painting? 1656?
1656, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I'm never quite sure. The painting already asks you to invent the narrative of the room, right? And then my original video also asks you further to invent the narrative of the room and take part in the creation somehow. And then with Misha, when we decided we were going to explode that video and make it into 2,304 parts, again, the viewer and the audience takes part, right? In restructuring the piece, in putting the back together, and again, reinvent the piece. So there's always sort of this invitation for the audience to invent something, to take part somehow. And I think that's different than what happens in sort of your traditional idea of narrative cinema or television, right? Where you're spoon-fed the narrative, you're told what's going on, and you sit there very passively. I'm asking the viewer to not be so passive.
Before the viewer comes in, there's all the components that have to come together. You've had to think about, so you've looked at the painting, you were the Prado, you looked at the Las Meninas, and what was about that painting that sparked this in you? Like, because it was that painting that just triggered all of this. So what exactly was it that incited this creative moment? There's something massive here.
I mean, I'm not the first and I'm not the last, for one thing. There are hundreds of artists that have made variations on Las Meninas. I think Picasso made 180 drawings and paintings based on Las Meninas, right? I mean, there's those famous, what are they? The famous Thomas Struth photographs, obviously. There's many artists who have made variations on Las Meninas, like you have, variations on Bach or something. So to say like what sparked you to do that, it is an artwork. There's a reason that it's one of the most famous paintings of the canon of Western art, right? It is completely magnetic in its presentation. But for me, I thought it had a really interesting relationship to photography, even though it predates photography by about 300 years. And that has to do with the sort of efficacy of Velázquez as a painter, and that I think he was kind of the only painter of that, what we would say, I guess, Baroque into Renaissance, but Baroque period, it's still Baroque really, that was capturing the psychology of his subjects in a way that you really don't see until snapshot photography. You see it, what I think of when I think of Las Meninas is like Tina Barney for photographs, right? When you look at those famous photographs of hers of aristocratic families, right? To me, those remind me of Las Meninas. Or you even look at just snapshots of people hanging out in their kitchen. And that to me has, in a way, something that Velázquez was able to do, even though they had no idea about photography, but because he was such an effective painter, that you feel that the characters he's painting, the people he's painting, that they have a real human psychology. And you don't feel that in a lot of painting of that period. You feel that in more modern painting. You might feel that in like John Singer Sargent. You feel that in a certain type of portraiture, but you don't feel it in Baroque painting. And so that was where Velázquez really sets himself apart in all of his portraiture, not just in Las Meninas. But in Las Meninas, it's riveting, right? Like you do feel like those people are about to walk off the canvas and the Infanta is staring at you. And how is it possible that her psychology seems so real, but it's this, what are we looking at? A 400-year-old painting, right? And so I think the photographic psychological condition of it was what made me feel like, well, then if you're treating it like that, it's a film still, because everybody's in mid gesture,
Yes.
right? It's asking for choreography. It's asking for blocking. It's all about movement. Everybody's in a gesture where you wouldn't sit and hold that gesture, even if somebody's painting your portrait. You wouldn't be able to sit and hold that for more than a minute or two, but you wouldn't hold that for a half an hour the way you would sit for a portrait, right?
Right.
Like the meninos are there in this strange position, serving the tray and blah, blah, and everybody's about to move somewhere else. So if you look at it, okay, it's a film still, there's got to be film stills that came before it, and there has to be film stills that came after it. So let's invent those. Well, if you're going to invent those, you do have to invent them cinematically and with choreography and with light and with basically
exactly
with the tools of movie making, but not with the intention of traditional narrative filmmaking.
But what you brought together was not just choreography and actors. You brought together costume designers, architects to make sure that the space is laid out like, you know, a representation of that room in Velázquez's painting. Conceptually, it is complete. The only thing it's missing is the smells, probably from the era. We can probably imply the dog smell and other things.
That would have been funny. That would have been very John Waters or something. You know, yeah, no, but I mean, it wouldn't have worked, I think, to not try to replicate that room to scale with the right light, with the right color, with, you know, but this is also the idea, the power of implication, right? Like that is what I think you can do when you let the viewer complete the picture, because people look at it and think, oh, they look so much like the characters in the painting. Well, in reality, none of those actors looked anything like the characters in the painting. But our mind sort of melds it together in a way that they do, you know? Like, you know, our eyeballs see two different things and make one picture in our head. And the picture in our head is not exactly real of what we're seeing, but we complete it, and in our memory, we complete it even more. And we say, oh, they really look like the painting. Well, actually, they really did not. But it didn't matter. You have enough implication that you can make people start to believe something. It's a little bit like, you know, people do in a court of law, right? Where the defense lawyer tries to get a witness to say something. The judge will throw it out and tell the jury they have to forget it, but the jury already has it in their head. So how are they going to forget it? We've created an implication. The implication does not leave your brain. You know, it's still there. You know, even if you think you've forgotten it, you think you have this memory, and it's not really clear what is and what isn't. And I think that's true in the original painting. It's true in the video that I originally created, and it's sort of true in the atomized version too, right?
I think that's even more so in the atomized version.
Yeah, like what is and what isn't, what's real and what's not, you know, which atoms are turned on and off. And so I'm very interested in the power of implication and in the power of what you can make someone believe. And so part of creating the original 89 Seconds at Alcazar was, well, can we make people believe that they're seeing this room, and believe that the painting is moving, and believe that these characters are kind of real, in the same way that Velázquez made you believe, right? He made you totally believe that those characters were real. And historically, we understand that they were, right? But we don't really know anything, you know? So there's sort of this idea of implying belief and implying a physicality in a space where things are not physical, they're digital, right?
Completely. And this brings us to the deep fakes part of it. I mean, it's all a deep fake. It's all creation of something that's it's a real thing. It's not a fake, but it's implying something that might have or might have not been there. So the whole idea with 89 Seconds at Alcazar, not to even mention 89 Seconds Atomized, is the there or not there. Part of, was it real? Is it not real? Is it it's an art piece. There's this layer, this constant questioning of the object and its place in real terms or not real terms. But within the deepfakes, it makes perfect sense. Within the new version of art, it makes perfect sense. It makes sense in terms of where we are in terms of creation. But you went from 89 seconds at Alcazar to 89 seconds atomized. What was that response to? What were you looking for? What were you trying to achieve with that? Because it's on the blockchain. It's split into 2304 pieces, right? 2304 atoms. It looks phenomenal. But hold on, let's see a little bit the first version. Let's see the 89 seconds at Alcazar, and then and see what happens to it as it progresses. Let's watch the first part. Hold on.
No, he's going to ask you to bring that file up. We'll get it off you.
Wow. Yes, there's that movement in it that it comes. It feels like it's jumping out of Velázquez's painting into real life, in a way that you don't see. It doesn't. It's not something that you see. It's so you took it from here, though. You took it from this concept, this complete concept of architecture and choreography and costume design and narrative and the sound of crackling fire in the background to the blockchain. How'd that happen? What happened? So was that when you met Misha, or were you thinking about it before? What happened? Hello, Misha.
I'll let Misha tell that story. I think it's something. He can tell you it.
Well, actually, I've known Eve for something like 15 years, and about, I would say, 4 years ago was when a lot of these, what we call today NFTs, were just being sort of, they became a topic again. Like, I mean, maybe some of this technology goes back even further, but at the end of 2017, you have these two kind of what became like iconic NFT projects, CryptoPunks and CryptoKitties. And one essentially kind of popularized or like did an interpretation on what could be called digital scarcity and ability to own digital object, which was like sort of like a leap of faith in the way that you had to accept that type of interpretation of ownership and scarcity. And you have this other project that maybe is more playful, but what was interesting about it is that it started exploring the idea of interactivity, that ownership doesn't have to be passive, that the experience doesn't have to end at the moment of purchase. It can be the start of something. And I come from a more technological background, although I worked
exactly.
I worked.
How did you go from banking, software finance into this?
Yeah, it was probably more like boredom. I think a while back, I just I started getting into film and video. I went for a little while to get educated, and I come from a rather artistic family. Even my whole pursuit of this technology was a little bit odd, if you understand where I'm coming from. And it kind of pulled me back. I became interested in it. It inspired me. It made me enjoy the process. And when I started examining what blockchain potential is in this space, I began to think conceptually. And because of my work with video art and with Eve specifically, I knew that one of the first people that I would like to talk to about this conceptually was Eve. And when we started discussing it, we kind of were looking at it more like not about just putting visual information on the blockchain and trying to be all excited about scarcity and provenance and all of these elements that are, especially in the past year, have completely blown up. But we were actually trying to think, how can we look at it beyond that? How can we look at it more as a tool towards solving some conceptual problems and expand the piece, not just like take 89 seconds at Alcazar and put it on the blockchain, but
because that's been done.
89 seconds at Alcazar.
Not that one, but things like that have been done.
They have been done, especially more recently. But at that time, for example, even though I've known Eve for 15 years, I only saw 89 seconds at Alcazar once by accident. I was in Moscow. It was shown in a museum. I was surprised to see on the billboard a name of somebody that was somebody I knew closely. And I walked in and I experienced it for the first time. All of a sudden, we have this technology at hand that allows us to take advantage of the digital nature of the, of the original artwork, to think through conceptually, how can we make it where, we could take something that is ultimately was designed based on the original concept of editioning a piece and, is currently in several major collections, museums or private collections, and take it to a place where we don't necessarily destroy the notion of the edition, but actually make it a communal artwork, a true kind of like collective ownership model, but not just like owning something fractionally where you never experience the artwork, but actually try to become an active participant. So in other words, like everyone who is an owner of a single fragment, these fragments are an NFT, but they're sort of not the same NFTs that you currently are reading about. These NFTs have an extra embedded functionality to allow you to request from every other collector of 89 seconds atomized the right to borrow their pieces for 24 hours. And that is new and that's interesting. And it also, we were innovating even on the notion of ownership. If the whatever the design of NFTs implied this kind of a little bit of notion of ownership, that it's just like a sort of certificate that's traded on chain and that just, everybody can see it, but only you own it. All of a sudden now you had the additional right to allow to let somebody borrow your piece and reconstruct the piece. And then that, in fact, was even at that time quite fascinating to us, because when Matt and John, the creators of CryptoPunks, they were initially, it was a very small world out here in Brooklyn. A lot of these early projects developed in, these types of kind of small communities of artists and technologists trying to innovate in the space. But when we were talking to them, they said that at the time that they thought at that time about a third of CryptoPunks were lost forever, because people didn't take it seriously. I mean, they would just buy this piece and then they would forget access to their crypto wallet, and that's it. In essence, it sort of is gone.
That happens.
Yeah, which is crazy, especially now that the project is worth like $1 billion. So a lot of these people are probably scrambling to find their private keys to their wallets. But at that time, when we were innovating with this piece, we were super interested in this idea of also like this kind of digital mortality. What if people start forgetting like their keys to their atoms? What if they stop lending their pieces? The piece potentially will start being reconstructed over time with less and less fragments. And that also became quite interesting. The fact that each time the piece is reconstructed, it is different. Eve was super fascinated with giving this community an ability to fill in the negative space as they wanted, and this was also kind of interesting. We certainly, the piece that's being played at the EPFL right now is one of these interpretations where the atoms, some atoms that were denied a loan, we reconstructed using existing atoms that we did get a loan for, and we just randomly placed them in black spaces. And that gives a whole different nature to the piece. It's a completely different experience. You cannot confuse what you're seeing at the EPFL for the original 89 Seconds at Alcazar.
No, and it looks like the piece is evolving with time.
It is evolving because, since it's been there, some atoms have sold, some have been taken off the market, things change. But also, I think what Misha was talking about, that the piece is actually organic, and that maybe over the next 10 or 20 years, there will be atoms for sure that are lost. And so there will be holes in the piece. The piece may eventually die out, right? That it will be an organic life. And I'm quite interested in that too, that like any other organic being, it may die one day. Maybe it'll take a decade, maybe it'll take 100 years, but it'll actually evaporate. There may be a point where only one atom is visible at the end. And I think that process could be quite beautiful and interesting. I don't know if I'll live to see it, but it's quite interesting.
So as an art piece evolves like that, like it's covered with mediums and with, destroyed by UV and, the smoke and all that stuff, so does this piece in a way, and it gets lost under another painting basically. So, but your piece basically can dissipate atom by atom, the 20 pixels by 20 pixels, but also it can come back together. Is that correct? So if those pieces are, if you find the key, the access points to those atom pieces that were missing, we can bring the work back together. So
in theory, you could bring back all 2,304 atoms, and you would be seeing the complete 89 Seconds at Alcazar. However, some of my atoms are deactivated. They're turned off. So if I give permission, then you would never be able to, let's say there's 7 of my atoms turned off, which I don't even know, maybe there's a few. Yeah, in theory, if you could get every collector and owner, including myself, because I still own quite a few atoms, to agree to loan every single atom, you would be watching a reconstruction of the original video. It's true. You would be watching a reconstruction of my final artist proof, because it was my final artist proof that we cut up, that we shattered. To get every single owner to agree might be tricky.
And actually, I would say even further, at the time when we were designing the mechanics behind the new piece, we were considering different variations. A big topic at the time was governance, and you could start having almost like community votes. And so if you have 51% of owners agree, or 51% of atoms agree to the screening, then the entire piece reconstructs. And that would have been one variation of it. But to us at that time, that was not as interesting. It actually, the chaotic nature of actually giving each owner that type of power over the piece reinforced the original conception that we wanted that kind of individual involvement. Otherwise, people will be passive. They will always rely on this 51% democratic rule. And, the notions of digital mortality were super fascinating to us. And I think this is kind of what I'm I'm excited a little bit, even though like there's been a lot of craziness over the past year. There's been more and more projects coming around that are exploring the blockchain space conceptually and are breaking rules. And I think that's where you start seeing interesting projects come around. People who are actually trying to think about it conceptually rather than just a simple tool to just like replicate what we're experiencing in in cinema or in a gallery setting, just to put it on chain. But once you start using the technology more creatively, I think more interesting things can come out of it.
So there's a quick parallel between this, the 89 Seconds Atomized, and quote unquote real, like that's not quote unquote, it's an actual Picasso, it's a real Picasso. The parallel between the two is that this one is, NFTs, and it's, owned by 2304 individuals, or pieces. It's split into 2304 pieces. The other one, the Picasso we have in in the Deepfakes Artnets Double exhibition, it's close to in terms of location on in a gallery to your work, is that one is owned by 23 to 23,000 Swiss people, individuals owning this piece through the blockchain, and it's collective ownership. But that piece is not going to get split into tiny little atoms. This one it's still growing. It's still an art piece, so it's still evolving, right? But the evolution of a digital piece it's much faster than the evolution of a physical piece. But we're still talking about collective ownership and bringing democratizing art, basically. Is that the thought behind splitting it into that many pieces, giving access to more people to own bits and pieces of art?
Well, this is interesting. Your question is that, in my mind, it's a little bit, it's a similar idea, but different, perspective on it. Where you're talking about fractional ownership, essentially like owning a share of a racehorse or owning a stock in Microsoft, is to me, it's less about some kind of participation in some kind of artistic experience. It's more of it's an investment.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And what we're trying to do, on the one hand, yes, like of course, it's an expensive artwork and it's not affordable. And of course, by owning a fraction of it, you are getting access to something that maybe would not be affordable if you were trying to acquire the full 89 seconds at Alcazar on the secondary market. But it is to some extent about democratization, of course, sure, like I could accept it, but really the focus was always about almost like democratization of access and experience. It's about, I mean, look, we're talking about a digital medium. We don't have to, if we're talking about a Picasso painting, the Picasso painting has to exist in a single place at a
physical
time.
Space, yes.
Yeah, and digital can move at a speed of light. We can start rethinking the notions, certain notions that are coming from traditional physical art space when we're talking about digital. We can, I mean, there's millions of variations of ownership that is still have not been explored, and I'm sure they will be. But of course, like the more natural inclination is to repeat what we are, the mechanisms that we have in the physical space into digital. And so the notion of a fractional ownership it is natural. Like, of course, blockchain provides a certain amount of transparency over the transactions, and you could legitimize it by seeing that you do own this share versus something that would have like existed 20 years ago. There would have been some kind of an art fund formed where you could like own a share of this art fund, and the art fund would acquire Picasso. And in essence, it would be the same thing, except less transparent. This is way different. You have to
Exactly.
Visually you see it, you feel it.
Exactly.
Every owner of a fragment owns the fragment. They, like I meet people all the time at events, or I was just in Art Basel, Miami, and there was this woman that was super excited to show me her crypto wallet and show me this atom that she acquired 3 years ago. And she was super excited to be part of this artwork. And she loved the idea that you can actually, she herself can borrow the piece for 24 hours and experience. She could have that moment that I had. Maybe not exactly. Of course, the in the museum settings, it's a different experience, but she could get close to it. And I only got to see that work once in Moscow, by chance. And this opens up a whole other possibilities of experiences that I think were not possible before this kind of like blockchain mechanism would come into play. So yeah, maybe that's
exactly. But so let's talk about how NFTs kind of free up the art world. Take us through some of the options that basically you have as an artist, with NFTs. For example,
let's take Miami, where it was like a big deal this year, right?
Yeah, no.
This year, yeah.
I would call it like a hijacking of Art Basel by
the NFT world,
NFT projects.
Yeah.
This is going to be, maybe will wind up being a very long conversation, but I will try to do it in a very simple way. So on a very basic level, blockchain is just a ledger of transactions. And so what NFTs are just the record in this ledger. So if you, Monica, decided to create like a digital artwork, it could be, you could draw a digital circle and tokenize it. That circle will become part of this registry, and your crypto wallet will represent you in the same registry, and it will say, Monica created this first NFT, and then this NFT can be traded, it could be gifted, there could be a number of mechanisms that can be added to it. But this is a very simple concept. Now, where it gets more tricky, and this is something that we've been exploring for 3 or 4 years, and right now people are exploring a lot more, is that these NFTs can also unlock certain experiences. They can give you, they are essentially a key to something. In 89 Seconds at Alcazar, the smart contract that governs, smart contract is like a set of rules, or it's a piece of code that governs the functions of a specific token or this NFT. So the smart contract in Eve's case gives you this ability decentrally. And again, this is the big really thing, is that it's decentralized system. So we're not relying on anybody. So any atom holder, even if like Snark didn't exist, or, they can probably with a little bit of training, figure out how to use their individual atom as a key to get access to the remaining atoms that are available. And this type of functionality is not something that the artists or technologists are currently exploring, and we're one of these teams that are exploring in the space, where we're working with artists to come up with these keys and figuring out how this experience can unfold. And then you could start thinking of, especially with the the development of the social nature of the world through social networks, or the metaverse experiences that are being pushed through right now. How can these essentially keys can open up new kind of interactions? And this is kind of what we're excited about, is to allow artists to determine these rules and to figure out these interactions. And then the potential is limitless, because it's only limited by imagination of the artists that we're working with. And maybe also some rules of the technology. We can't break all the rules, but we can break a lot of them. So
you can create some new ones.
So that's probably enough. Otherwise, we can talk for hours, I think.
Well, we're going to continue a little bit more on this topic, because let's say, for example, Eve has an idea that she wants to put into the metaverse. She wants to. So the process is is available. This can happen right now. That's not an issue. How are you doing that? Like, how is snark.art helping artists to bring something like a concept like this video, the 89 seconds of Alcazar, into, or 89 seconds atomized, into the NFT world, into even further into creating new experiences into the metaverse?
I mean, they're basically acting as the producer. I mean, if you think of it as the traditional idea of what happens when you make a movie, you might be the writer or the director, right? And so you have the concept of what should happen, what you want to make happen on the screen, but all of the nuts and bolts technically. I mean, there are film directors that don't know how to use a camera, for instance. Their DP knows how to use the camera. But there are architects that don't know how to put two 2x4s together. Their carpenter or their contractor knows how to put two 2x4s together. The architect knows how to do drawing. I mean, in this case, I kind of know how to make a film, but I don't know how to put it on the blockchain. I don't know how to turn it into an NFT. I don't know how to write a smart contract. I don't know how to shatter it technically into 2,304 pieces. That's what Misha and his team, as producers, I mean, that's where I think Snark is set apart from many of these NFT platforms, where they're putting, pardon my French, but they're like putting a lot of crap up there, right? They're putting a lot of stuff that looks like bad 1970s art that you'd see on the side of a van. And you're American, I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Like,
I do.
I'm serious, maybe we want to cut that part, maybe it was inappropriate, but it's like you need a producer that knows how to do the technical part of what you want to do, whatever your vision might be. And what Misha brings as a very particular type of producer is a background in film and a background also with visual art from his family and people he just knows from his past. And so he's able to, even if I say, well, I have this idea to do XYZ, he's able to really bounce it off of me or different artists he works with creatively that really grows the idea into a completely new space. Because when you're coming through it as a background in a more, even if you're in a more experimental art place, you don't even understand now what's technically possible in the NFT space, right? Or in this blockchain space. It's very hard to understand where you're navigating to.
But that's not your level of that's not your field of expertise. That's somebody else's field of expertise.
And like 3 years ago, when Misha came to me and was like, we can sort of do this thing, and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was like you needed a translator. You needed someone who could not only help you produce the work, be your technical producer, but even translate the language for you, right? You were not understanding any of it. And I'll say 3 years later, I understand the tip of the iceberg, but there's still a vast majority of what goes on in the blockchain world that I have a basic visual conception of what goes on. I don't really have a good intellectual, technological conception of what's going on. I don't understand the engineering, the computer engineering behind or something.
But it makes sense. I mean, you're not. I mean, it takes years to specialize in that. It takes years of working in that. Your specialty is not that.
Right, but
what Misha's is.
What I think Misha brings to it that's really unique is that somebody who understands both the computer engineering and technological aspect to it, and can understand how to tweak those tools to make whatever creative project you have even more interesting or even more conceptually deep, or giving it extra layers that you wouldn't have thought of as the artist because you didn't even know they were possible. And that's what having somebody who's got a technological background and an art background and can be your producer, that's what's, I think, rare that like someone with Misha's skill set was able to do. But I don't think there's that many people in the NFT space that can really creatively conceptualize the digital layer in that way. And that's where it's very, very interesting to collaborate with him in terms of bouncing off these ideas, right? Like even like, okay, well, we're going to break this thing apart. I sort of had that idea. Let's take this video that's kind of iconic now and that I sold it out 10 years ago. I only have my copy left, and let's shatter it. But I didn't really understand what that meant. And I didn't really understand how you might put it back together. And I didn't even really understand what it would look like that people would get in the end. And that each one of these atoms could look like a beautiful little color field painting and would be sort of very twinkly and have its own individual artistic integrity as a little 400 pixel artwork, you know? And that even the way that renders on the screen as these little blocks with sort of a grid, that's an aesthetic choice. That had to be designed, that had to be created. You know, it could have looked like a blur. It could have looked, that 400 pixels could have looked very different. You know, it would have had the same color space. It would have had similar digital information. But every aspect of what you see has to be created and designed and figured out. And then there has to be a way to give it a life that it can be brought back to the blockchain, right? And so it's all of that is stuff that you might be able to conceptualize as a visual artist, but you don't even maybe know in the beginning what's possible.
And I would just maybe add the opposite side of it, in that when we're working with artists, you know, like let's say that like Eve mentioned, she wants to break up an artwork into X number of pieces, and then, you know, based on my experience or based on other projects that I've worked on, I say, oh, but you can do A, B, and C. What I'm excited about most is the option D, E, and F, because what I'm actually looking for at that moment is for the artist to actually say, but can we do this? Can we do that? And that's when we're actually pushing the boundaries of the technology, because then, like, you know, I'm coming from a place where I understand here's the possibilities based on how I, you know, like maybe based on my experience or based on some projects that I've seen in the space. And I'm relaying this information to the artists and saying, okay, you know, let's innovate on this. And if they push me, I take that as a challenge to see whether or not we can break that law of gravity. Can we actually go left where everything says that we need to go right? And if we can break it, that's even more exciting for me. And so that, because that essentially opens up a realm of possibilities where I think this technology can go. It opens up like like a lot of artists right now that I meet, they, you know, like they're saying, okay, we created this project, but we were inspired a lot by what you did, for example, on this like Volkmar Cleans project with sound drawings. And we wanted to do something similar, but different. But again, it's a type of idea that doesn't often come to mind right away unless you start having these conversations. And then through a series of conversations, you start sort of conceptualize and figuring out the trajectory where this project can go. And then it's about finding the pieces and producing the project. But at the end of the project, I hope that we broke some rule. I hope that we broke some idea. I hope we created something new, because ultimately at the center of this is some kind of, I mean, it is art at the center of it. This is like everything else is a tool, but let's make it good. Let's make it like exciting and interesting and interactive, and push the bounds if we can. We're not going to be perfect each time, you know, like we're limited, we're human, and we have limited resources, but with the resources that we have, let's do something exciting and creative.
I want to show the 89 seconds atomized, a portion of that, and then I want to come back to a little bit more conversation if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
This is part of the whole thing. We can show the whole thing, but it's part of it. And the one thing I want you to like chime in if possible is the grid and the grid view, the bids and the offers view, which I find very very interesting. So I'm going to bring you back in again. Maybe we can discuss a little bit about of that. What do you think? So here we have the bids view.
Those are the bids, right?
Those are the different atoms, right? Like where I'm
yeah, those
scrolling
are the ones
through.
you can bid on, right? Yeah.
Oh my
Because
God.
that crazy person did. Yes,
This
that's
is
what
something
happened.
that happened recently. Okay.
Yes, this is basically, well, this is what happens in real time when you deal with anonymous people. Some crazy
These are
person.
phenomenal.
Some
And
the fact that they have a blue line means it's been bid on, right?
Yeah, there's been, and this is like something that happens in the speculative space, is that some people are actually, let's say these atoms are being sold right now for whatever price, but there's people that obviously are not, like for example, when we first did this project, Eve gifted every participant of the original piece an atom. So there's plenty of people that own atoms. They don't even understand what they own. They have a crypto wallet and they have this atom in there. And so there are these people who essentially try to just offer them money, like like sort of significantly underbidding what the market price for this, but they're offering real money. And so like there's a person right now that is every day bidding on available atoms and putting in bids. So what you're seeing actually is this individual over the past month, he's placed bids on pretty much every atom available. Usually we never saw, actually, it's the first time I'm actually seeing this.
I saw it the other day.
Wow,
I saw it
wow.
the other day. Yeah, I was like, yeah, it's crazy looking because normally those blues, like you see, not every single square, every single atom has a blue line around it.
right.
But everyone that has a blue line means that someone has made an offer to buy, but they haven't bought because the offer is not acceptable to the owner of the atom. And so anybody who owns those atoms where there is an offer could decide to sell it to this person who's made the offer. But it seems that not many people are accepting these offers because the offers are quite low. But it is quite funny to see in real time when there is some move of the atom. So there is a response to the atoms, whether it's a bid or a sale or a transfer. You can actually bring that. You can watch what's happening by clicking those buttons and seeing who's offering, who's selling, who's not. But yeah, if you double click any of those atoms, it will expand and show you the individual 400 pixel artwork as its own unique individual thing. And then you can watch the individual atom as a little moving sort of color field painting. And that is also quite a nice and funny thing to do.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. You can also sort of scrub through them. You can forward fast. You can go backwards. You can pause it, and really see each one as this individual little. There you go, and you can see each one as this individual little artwork.
And they're moving. They were moving. It's moving. There's
when you point to it, just to give you a sensation that there is an actual atom behind it. Absolutely. Well, thank you, by the way, for showing me this grid. I actually haven't looked at, because usually you see maybe, I don't know, at any one time you'll see like 10 offers and 5 bids that are happening on these decentralized exchanges, because all of the stuff that you're seeing right now is actually pulled off chain. So there's these bids and offers happening on this platform called OpenSea, which is one of these bigger NFT exchanges. and people are actually bidding there, but we're pulling in this information from those active bids. And if we looked at this maybe 2 or 3 months ago, you would see maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 atoms that are being in the process of being either like somebody was offering some sum of money to buy them, or somebody was willing to sell them for a certain amount of money. And I think you could still probably, where you see like on the upper, maybe somewhere you see bids and offers, you could actually turn off, I think, bids. And then
Yes.
maybe then you would only see the offers if there's any.
I'm not seeing any offer yet.
Okay, so maybe there's it's not pulling anything. So anyways, that's the
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody created a bot, basically. I think there was a robot bidding every day or every minute. I mean, there was a point where I was getting an email every minute because there was a bot bidding on every single atom that was on OpenSea. And so I got my email got flooded one day with this robot bid.
Yeah, but so that alone, that experience alone, seeing it the way it is right now with with the grids on top, it makes it even clearer that it's a digital art piece. It makes it even clearer that it's atomized.
And it makes it clearer that it's interactive. It makes it clearer that I no longer have control of this artwork, right? That it's out there in the world, and people are going to interact with it the way they see fit. And if somebody wants to try to buy every single atom from every single other owner, they can try. Clearly, this person has created a bot to do that and is trying.
They're trying hard. From the look of the paint, the screen, they're trying hard.
We're pretty sure that basically all of these bids have come from the same place.
And by the way, to place so many bids, you need to have a wallet with at least probably a couple of $1 million to be able to even place them.
Really? Why? Because it's taking gas?
No, it's not taking gas, but it needs to be certain that if all of these individuals
were to say yes,
were to say at the same time,
that you could pay the money.
Really? It needs to execute. I think so. Yeah.
So that if everybody accepted all of these bids all at once, and the wallet wasn't able to pay it.
I'm guessing that yeah. Well, no, I think that and again,
OpenSea would block you.
They need to confirm that you have enough funds to
cover all your bids all at once.
To cover, yeah, but I guess so. I actually I've never bid on thousands
on that many
at the same time, so I wouldn't know. But
that would be pretty funny, Misha. I should say, fuck you. I'm accepting all of these bids. Really quite low.
Yeah.
So that being said, this piece is living in the digital world. It's being bid on, as you can see, by either one person or quite a few people.
Somebody's trying to take control of it. Clearly, they have not succeeded, but they're trying to take control of it.
Maybe they purchase the other ones. The ones
that are doing it once they take control of it. I guess that is one funny thing, right? If one person could manage to buy almost all of the NFTs, all of the atoms, they could take it down, right? They could basically, so no one else could watch it ever again. You know, they could turn off all of those atoms and say, I will not loan them out. You know, you are not able to borrow them. This person has not managed to do that, but it seems like they're trying.
But it's difficult. There's like, I think at this point there's over 300 owners of different number. You know, like some people own more, some people own a lot more. I think that's the whole decentralized aspect of this, you know, where, like if you're even talking about the original piece, there's 10 editions. So it's maybe even a more doable as an attempt versus having to find hundreds of people who are anonymous, you know, on top of it. So like, for example, if you're registered on these decentralized exchanges and you provided your email address, then there is a way to get in touch with you. So they would be notified, like Eve was notified that there's somebody that's bidding on these atoms. But if you just own it anonymously, that's a whole aspect of anonymity on chain that you wouldn't even know how to contact the owner to try to buy it off of them. So I think that task is close to impossible, especially given the diverse nature of Eve's collectors. You should have seen it was so nice to see when we first did like an opening for this artwork, just the different types of people that were coming, to that first event that we put together. It's it's a lot of people from like art community, that Eve's friends and people that admire her work, to all these like crypto, what they call like crypto community, and people who at that time were innovating in the space. It was a very diverse group of people. And it's actually interesting that in a single artwork, it is a sort of like at the same time a social experiment of bringing people together as a sort of like social network type of thing through a single artwork. And I think this is something that we might see more and more as the space develops, especially more and more projects are focusing on creating projects that have thousands of elements or thousands of NFTs within a single project. And so they are all about creating these small communities that are
collaborating.
Essentially, and communicating with each other. They're finding something in common with each other through artworks that they own or they interact through.
I think this world is barely starting. It's just at a tiny, tiny beginning. Where do you see it go? Where do you see, first of all, digital art go? So, Eve, where do you see this, progressing towards what? And I'm not talking 5 years from now. I'm talking next year, because 5 years seems quite a long time. When we're talking about digital arts, media art, we're talking about these kinds of projects. So where do you see it evolve?
I mean, I think Misha's the better person for that question, but
we'll get to Misha for the technology part, but
I see it. I think from relating to what Misha just said, that as a more collaborative medium, right? As a medium where many people can take part in the creation of a single project, and where a project really has legs and might go off in different directions. And so that's where that's one direction for sure. But yeah, maybe Misha can chip in better with some of those ideas.
I mean, yeah, certainly I could tell you that in many ways what I'm seeing right now is this kind of war for digital space, that people are spending insane amount of time in front of digital devices, whether it's like iPads, iPhones, computers. We're constantly in front of screens, and this kind of schizophrenia between our physical real lives and our digital lives is really being explored in many ways, and not always in a good way. And I'm worried a lot as far as where things are going. And I understand that I'm actually, in many ways, one of the contributors to.
You met the enemy, and it was us.
And it was us, yeah. But I hope that at least we can, if we can bring anything good to the space, it is going to be through these types of collaborations. To explore the space creatively, I think is quite important, rather than having corporations just throw crazy amounts of money just to create something that is, I don't know, like in many ways could be disappointing. And if we get there, as you said, in 5 years, and we're in this digital space that is, I don't know, like not inspiring, to say the least, and yet it's dragging more and more of our time. And especially if you're watching kids these days, like they are being sucked into this world even more so than, I mean, at least we grew up in a physical reality. They're already accustomed to the digital reality, and for them, these experiences and these gamified experiences are becoming almost like a drug that ultimately will result in them being, if we're spending, I don't know, a third of our times in digital devices, they'll be spending 90% of the time.
Like these things where like these little avatars repeat your emotions, your facial emotions and stuff.
Oh my God. I mean, the things that I'm seeing is, I mean, first of all, technologically, it's incredible. But in terms of how things will develop, I have sometimes a lot of kind of concern over this future. I'm certainly going to work in the space and hopefully create beautiful parts of the space, but I'm not yet looking forward. I'm clinging on to the physical reality as much as I can.
And you know, maybe there's some little scratching hope that like early on, Misha did a project with me and my partner and a couple other people, Jack and Lee Ruby, that we collaborate with, called All the Reporters Laughed, and took pictures where it was a live performance with real people, but for the public took part in it. So the public joined the performance, but their way of joining the performance was through these tokens we gave away. So through these NFTs that we gave away, they grabbed a token, and then they got through that token, they got information about where to go, a little bit like a treasure hunt, but in real life. Like you had to go to this building next to the UN, and you had to enter the building, and you had to go to a certain floor, and you had to find a certain group of people, and then you had to repeat what those people were saying to you. And so there was almost this sort of theatrical event, this performance piece that was live in real life with real people. This was before the pandemic. And
a lot of things happened before the pandemic.
Your invitation into it was still through blockchain space, still through a token that Snark gave away. And so this was a way of having this thing that started as a digital experience, and that was sort of your ticket, right? That was the way you got this secret information about where to go. That was how you knew to take part, and you knew the phone number to dial, and it also involved using your cell phone. But you were actually physically doing a thing humanly in space with other bodies that was a theatrical performance piece. And so it doesn't all have to be this horrible, cartoonified, gamified avatar thing that sucks up all of your mental energy. I mean, it can take that mental energy and channel it into something that's real in real life, in real physical space. And I mean, a lot of what I'm doing now with Simon Lee, my partner, main collaborator, is making these things that are in between theater and video and live events. We just did a rehearsal for a piece where we had one actor in Germany, one actor in Connecticut, 2 hours north of New York, and one actor live in the rehearsal space in the studio, and then 7 video and projection screens. And so we're editing video live. The actors are streaming in live from different geographies all over the world. But there were 50 people in the space witnessing it as live theater. And that actually didn't have a blockchain component, but we could see growing that piece into having some kind of a blockchain component. You know, how exactly would that be? How you bring in these people, you know, since the pandemic, since we all had to work on these kind of meeting, Zoom type of digital interfaces, you know, as Misha's saying, it's become more and more ubiquitous. It's now like typical that, oh, we don't have to meet in real life. We can just talk on Zoom, even though we're both in New York, right? And sometimes that's just easier and more convenient, right? Even though now in New York, we can meet in real life. And so it doesn't all have to have this. I mean, I think the only way we're going to make some kind of little bulwark against this wash of evil shit that's coming from these huge corporations that they are making, that is hypnotizing all of like the kids that are the age of his daughter, you know, like, is to do these things that are more creative and mix physical space and real life with this NFT stuff and the digital stuff, and make it have a human component, right? I mean, like I say, the rehearsal we just did, it didn't have an NFT component, but it had a huge digital component. You know, we were using Resolume, we were using Loopback, we were using all of this audio and digital and video technology editing live from different countries. And so that digital component was massive, but it was still a live theater piece. you know, and pretty much all theater is like that now, right? You rarely go to a live theater piece where there's not a massive digital component, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have, you know, your audio engineers, you have your video techs, you have all of the people running lights, which is all digital now. And so it's pretty much there in everything we're doing. And so it's like, we just have to figure out how to do what Misha's saying, which is subverting some little fraction of it into something that isn't this horrible corporatized brainwashing thing, but is something that actually expands your thinking instead of trying to take control of your thinking. The scary part that I think Misha is referring to, and we do see it so much in kids today, is that you feel like it's contracting their thinking, not expanding their thinking. And so how do we use it as a means to expand people's concepts of how to live and how to be in the world? And I think what you try to do is mix it with real life, right? Mix it with the physical.
Yeah,
but also we know that art is going to save the world. Art has always saved civilization. Art has always shown civilization and saved civilization.
You're a believer. You're a believer. I mean, you know, you can look at it from both sides, but there's an aspect to it that, you know, that even the most apolitical art is still political in that it is about expression, and expression has an idea about what we would think of as freedom, and therefore you have to think of, you know, even the most abstract color field painting or something as a political expression. But
it's anthropology. It's we're seeing the culture through its art. So that's in many ways why the art in general is going to save our civilization. But in terms of what you're thinking in terms of your art, what are you thinking for the next 2, 3, 5 years? What kind of project you're conceiving of? Where are you going in terms of creative process?
You're asking me? You're asking Misha?
I'm asking you because
I want to hear what Misha's saying too, but I'll answer in that. Well, a lot of what I've been doing is what I just described, which is this crossover between film, video, live theater, live events, time-based events that they follow more the rules of theater than film. They might use projected video and projected film and photography and even sculpture and architecture. I'm very interested in architecture. I mean, part of my day job is I work on buildings. And so, you know, we are still bodies in space, right? We are still bodies in space. Before the pandemic, I was working on a dance piece. I'm maybe interested in reviving that. You know, I mean, there's a Michael Snow retrospective in New York, a Canadian abstract filmmaker who's now in his 90s, he's still alive. And, you know, these famous films from the 60s and 70s, these endurance films, you know, they're very inspiring in a way because they really look at part of what they're dealing with is language and humans in space and people in architecture and just they're sort of sometimes very long and excruciatingly documenting just existing in the world. And so I'm more and more interested, not so much in the traditions of like film something, edit it, have a finished product of a video, and more in the live event. But like I was saying, I think we can even use this digital and NFT space to help create these live events, you know? And we can start creating live events, as we've learned during the pandemic where you had no choice.
Yeah.
People all over the world at the same time, right?
Mm.
And sometimes that's frustrating and sometimes it's quite inspiring. And sometimes it means I can work with artists who I really love, but they happen to live 6,000 miles away. And that was quite special. And to be able to do that in the digital space and then bring it into the real theatrical live space and have 50 people in a studio watching it all at once together and being quite excited about it was very special. And so I guess in a way I'm tending to afford things that are a little more like performance and theater, but ride that line between installation, film, video, theatrical, performance, and narrative. I mean, the thing that I was describing to you, it's based on these concepts of 1950s radio plays. So there is narrative there, there's storytelling there, but they're delivered in a way that's more experimental. You know, and then was just recently in Athens in Greece, where I made a piece 15 years ago, and thinking of trying to do a new project back there, that also has to do with sound and language. We did a piece actually that Misha helped us with in St. Petersburg in Russia, where we use simultaneous translators. So we were able to work with people who did not speak English and only spoke Russian. And then we worked also with people who were bilingual Russian English. And that put us in a place where we could do that in almost any country in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the way you can use simultaneous translation. There's also like all these translation apps now that are kind of amazing, right, and using that sort of digital realm. And so there's just, a lot more I think you can do with sort of the live performative aspect of making theatrical performance work, narrative, experimental narrative, but that has a more time-based quality, and it's a little more ephemeral, actually. It's not so product. I'm much less interested in having to worry about this idea of this product in the end.
And I would
in terms of Misha.
Yeah, no, like it's interesting because it's in essence many things that I'm interested in exploring in kind of this digital blockchain space goes back to that very same notion from 3 or 4 years ago. How do we make the experience less passive? And it like these same kind of same vocabulary comes to mind. It's participatory in nature. It forces people to act, not just take in. And especially as we're entering this metaverse and this digital reality, I want them to be participant. I want to kind of make them think, make them do something, because I think that's actually is kind of interesting. And if we can get my daughter and her little digital bicycle and her digital avatar out of that digital world into Eve's performance, and then she arrives there in real life, that's exciting. That's awesome. The other thing that project that we did maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where we sourced these like kind of like anonymous performers to, you know, essentially follow the instructions that were unlocked by owning a token. I participated in that performance just like they did, because the whole idea, or part of the idea, was the anonymity aspect. No one knew who was the puppeteer and who were the puppets, right? So we all arrived into the space, and then we had to follow a certain set of instructions. But what was amazing about it, and a lot of times in a lot of these projects that I'm lucky enough to have collaborated with Eve and Simon, is that oftentimes you realize that even when you're where you think you're a performer, you're actually the audience. That line is completely blurred. And these types of exchanges between the audience and the performers all of a sudden create this moment in time. And only in that moment in time, that experience takes place. Once it's over, it's over. You could take a video of the entire event and you will not understand it unless you were there to experience it. And this is where this whole like digital replication and using digital information without actually thinking through as far as how important the experience is, an experience that is very common in real life. You know, you walk outside. I remember like a friend of mine used to say that he rates cities like that he likes or doesn't like based on how much can happen to him when he walks a distance of about 10 blocks. And the cities where there is a lot more that can happen to him, he found more exciting and more interesting, and vice versa. And if we can create experiences like that in this new digital reality, if we could figure out a way to trick the technology, to trick the people into falling through these types of rabbit holes and come out of it with like a sense that something magical just happened, let's do it. Let's make these projects.
So basically, we're bringing it back to what Eve, what you were saying, at the beginning of our conversation, where you're thinking about creating pieces that are bringing the audience into the conversation, that they're participating in the whole creative process, and now you're topping it off, which I love that, with creating experiences that only live now, that are ephemeral, they live now. You have to experience it now. It's not going to be, you can't tap into it later.
It's like going to the theater. If you go to the theater, you go and you see the piece, and when you leave the theater, it's over. And if you were late for the show last night or you missed the show, you missed it. And when the run is over, it's over. And even if you go on a Tuesday night and I go on a Wednesday night, we've actually seen different shows. We haven't had the exact same experience, and so that's unique. But I am very interested in how the transfer from this digital space into real life can happen in a way that's more profound and more meaningful. And yeah, what Misha just described, you can get every 10-year-old out off of the screen and into a place where something is happening really in the world. Or you could, and when Misha described this All the Reporters project, where in the beginning you didn't even really know who was taking part. It was happening at an art fair, so there were hundreds of people milling around. And so you didn't know who's actually taking part here as an actor and who's not. And that moment was very exciting.
So I think we have a lot of exciting things to look forward to in the art world and in the years to come. Hopefully, we're not going to go the dark version that Misha is worried about. Hopefully.
We'll get out of it. Don't worry.
Well, the artist will find a way. Art will find a way forward. I'm sure of that. We've survived quite a few years, even through the dark ages. We've somehow managed to come out of that through art, with art. Yeah, this was a phenomenal conversation, and I'm super grateful to have had the opportunity to speak with both of you, not just about this really important piece in the Deepfakes Art and Double exhibition, but the importance of it in as a global perspective, looking at it, its impact into what's happening right now, what could happen in the future, what possibilities can come out of collaborations between a scientific mind and an artist mind, which is kind of what you guys are doing right now. So it's a phenomenal collaboration, what I've seen with you two, and I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to have spoken with you today and have you part of the In Conversation series, within the Deepfakes Art and Double exhibition at EPFL Pavilions in Lausanne, Switzerland. But huge thank you to you both. Thank you, Eve. Thank you, Misha. I appreciate it. And I want to also thank the viewers that have joined us today for this, and whenever they're going to chime back in to check out the conversation you guys have had with me. And I wanted to wish you guys a super happy continuation of your day, because you're 6 hours behind us. So enjoy the 6 hours of daylight that you have ahead, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for all the great questions and the great conversation. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Ciao.
Thanks, Eve. Thank you. Bye.